Collins & Co.'s not-for-profit conference, Be Empowered Through Knowledge, is designed specifically for the not-for-profit sector. Our speakers are experts in this sector, and their practical approach provides not-for-profit board members and management with the opportunity to improve their skills and knowledge across a range of specialist topics. The conference also provides a great networking opportunity.
This is going to be run as a workshop, so you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to stand here and talk at you for 50 minutes. Rest assured, I really can talk for a long, long time. As my husband often says, I can talk underwater. Even when I was very, very little, and I was living in England for a while, and we climbed this mountain. And when I say we climbed this mountain, I climbed the mountain by being on someone's back. And when he gets down to the bottom of the mountain, his mum said to him, "Oh, wow, Jeremy, you climbed Mount Snowdon the whole way with Michelle on your back." He goes, "Yeah, it was great, just like a backpack, although it talked the entire time." So I'm Michelle Gibbings. I run a consulting firm called Change Meridian, and all the work that I do is really designed to help people understand complex changing environments and what they need to do about it. So my focus for today is really to help give you some insights into this area and also some tools and techniques and things that you can take away with you. We're in particular focusing on the brain. And the reason we're focusing on the brain is because we all think our brain's infallible. So if I was going to ask you, by a show of hands, do you think you have above average intelligence? Most people in the room would stick their hand up. And if you didn't stick your hand up, you probably would want to join everybody else because you wouldn't want to admit it. But the thing is, our brain is fallible. Our brain sees and interprets the world through the lens of its own experience. And yet we're living in a world which is complex and changing at a pace faster than it's ever changed before. I was doing a radio interview this morning about career transition. And if you look at the stats, some of the stats are kind of scary when they talk about in the next 20 years, 40% of the jobs that currently exist will not exist anymore because they're going to be done by robots or they'll be done by computers and artificial intelligence. So through all of the change, though, creates opportunity. But it creates opportunity if you've got the ability to be able to either manage yourself through the change, or if you're in a leadership position, help your teams to thrive through change. So I always say to people, learning to love change, it's a life skill. Now, there's a whole heap of myths associated with change, though, as well. People often say, everyone hates change. And it's like, yeah, people don't like change when it's imposed on them. People like change, though, when there's a choice, when they feel as though they have some control over the outcome. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that you can think about and you can use to, one, self-manage change so that you can put yourself in the best possible position to thrive through it, but also so you can help the people around you to best manage change. Now, this term VUCA actually harks back about 40, 50 years ago. It's a military term, came out of the Cold War. But it makes sense in today's environment because we really are living in this volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. And even in the not-for-profit sector, you guys are going through constant change. There's also increasing expectations. If you're in a leadership role, you're constantly being asked to do more with less. You're constantly being asked to perhaps go that way, and then you turn up to work and there's been a decision made by the senior leaders, and they now want you to go that way. So there's this constant sense of frustration, and how do you make progress in an environment that is constantly changing? But so much of this comes down to you and your ability to cope and your ability to work through what do you want to do about it. How are you going to position yourself to be able to cope with the environment that is changing? So just by a show of hands, in the organisations that you're currently in, who's going through some form of change at the moment? About half the room. And your experience of change, would you consider it, crap, okay, or awesome? By a show of hands. Down here, here, or here. Your experience of change, where would you put it? Good, bad, or indifferent? Okay? Pretty good? Well done. Exciting, yay. And the change that was exciting, did you have a role in how the change was unfolding? You were leading it? Yes. What about others? What's your experience of change been? Good? Resistant? So the people around you have been resisting it? Yeah. And so we all come into an environment that's changing with a whole heap of different expectations. And we bring in preconceived ideas. The interesting thing though as well is often with leaders have almost like sometimes an outsourced mentality when it comes to change. Now I love Dilbert because I think Dilbert has a very cynical take on the world and a nice way to kind of view change. As a leader, you can't outsource your responsibilities. You play a role in making sure those around you understand what's going on, but also have they need the equipment, the skills, the tools to be able to cope with it. You can't do this. And I've worked in many, many organisations. So I worked in big corporates before I set up my own consulting firm a number of years ago. And I've worked on multi-billion-dollar change programs where the senior leaders would hire people in to basically try and manage the change for them. And my view was, yes, you can have change managers and they may facilitate the change, they may set some things up for you, but as the leader, you lead the change. As the leader, you have to be the person who's on the front foot. You have to be the person who's willing to have the tough conversations, but also do it with compassion and with empathy, understanding what's going on for the people who are being impacted by the change. So there's 4 questions that I want you to consider this morning, and we're going to talk about these as we get towards the end as well. So where are you now in terms of how you think about change, and where do you want to be? It's kind of like a current state of play. What's holding you back? Is there something in how you currently manage change that's holding you back from being as effective as you could be? What could be different for you? What's going to be in it for you? What's the benefit for you to change how you either lead change or change how you currently participate in change or react to change? And then lastly, how committed are you to making it happen? Because so much of what happens in this world is down to you. And often I find when I'm working with people as they're going through change, they're expecting everyone to kind of organise everything for them. And I go, actually, there's stuff that you can do. No matter where you sit in the hierarchy, there are things that you can do and choices that you can make to help yourself best be equipped to change. I was thinking about this as I was driving in this morning, thinking, at the moment I'm down back to the candle, given my lack of power. I'm really looking forward and hoping I go home tonight and we have light bulbs. But to me, change is a 3-step process. There's an awareness piece. How am I, as an individual, reacting to what's going on around me? And that's how we're going to talk about the brain. Because your brain reacts in a changing environment. And when you understand how your brain reacts, it then becomes really easy to notice what's going on for me and what do I need to do about it. There's an acceptance piece. Sometimes with change, there is stuff that you can't influence, but there might be stuff that you can influence or that you can change yourself. Understanding the difference is really important. And then lastly, what's the action? What are the steps you're going to take to put yourself or your team in the best possible position? So 3 A's, 3 steps. I'm going to go through each of those and give you some ideas and some things that you can then do. But the reason it starts with the leaders is all the research backs up that effective change is led by leaders. And Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy are 2 Harvard professors, and they do a lot of research into why is it that there are some organisations that are really good at changing and others that are absolutely crap at it. And what they've found is that when organisations try to change and fail to change, it's usually because the leaders don't realise that they actually need to change themselves somehow. It's not just about changing policy or changing process or changing a role. It's often about changing how they may be leading or changing how they're thinking and how they're reacting to things. So that's my challenge for you to think about. What is it that you may need to change? Because it's very easy for us to stand here and go, that person might need to change. I'm okay. That person needs to change. I'm okay. It's very hard for us to sometimes self-reflect about what do we need to change in ourselves. So I always say it needs to start from the inside out. So a couple of questions for you. What do you think is the hardest thing your brain does? You've got 4 choices. Long division, looking at a photograph, playing chess, or sleeping. Show of hands. Who thinks it's long division? No one. Clearly here, no one likes maths. Come on, Frank, I thought you would have stuck your hand up for that one. Who thinks it's B, looking at a photograph? A couple of Bs, 2 Bs. Who thinks it's C? A few Cs. And who thinks it's D? Really interesting. D always sort of is the one that gets the most votes. There is no doubt that sleeping is really important for you. If you don't get enough sleep, it's like turning up to work drunk. You are cognitively impaired. What happens at night is little vacuum cleaners come in and suck all the dead cells out of your brain so that you have energy in the next morning to create new brain cells. The hardest thing your brain does? Looking at a photograph. The hardest thing for your brain is perception. Your brain is this memory-seeking, meaning-seeking machine. It's constantly scanning the world, trying to work out what it needs to do. It does that based on what it's seen before. So it will make a whole heap of assumptions and then go, I don't know what I need to do. The problem, of course, is when you're in a new environment or if something is changing, basing your decisions on how to behave and what to do based on what you've done in the past may set you up for failure. So what do you see when you see this? How many legs? Yeah, you start with 4, then you go to 8, and then you can't work out whether the trunk's the leg, and eventually you can't get a headache. You're going to change the slide. So what is happening is we all live in the same world, but we all interpret the world through the lens of our own experience. So we're all taking on board information. We are constantly scanning the world, taking on board stuff. We also ditch a whole heap of stuff that we don't think we need to know. So our brain, without us even being consciously aware, will discard pieces of information. All of this creates our mindset. Has anyone here read or seen any of the work from Carol Dweck? So Carol Dweck is a Stanford academic. If you've got kids, you should Google her TED Talk. So she first started her work with children, and she discovered this, what she called a fixed or a growth mindset. So if you say to a child, you've done really well, you're so smart, versus you've done really well, you've worked so hard. Over time, it changes the child's willingness to take a risk with how they learn. The smart kid doesn't want to risk the label of not being smart anymore. So they stop doing things that are risky or that could be something that challenges how they learn that they may fail at. Whereas for the kids that have just worked hard, they have less of an identity to lose, so they're willing to work hard and just keep working hard. She then extrapolated her research into the organisational world and found that you have leaders with a fixed and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset being, I see my intelligence as innate. It's who I am. It's part of me. I don't need to learn anything more. I've got this whole thing nailed. I'm the smartest person in the room. Versus, I've got a growth mindset. There's always more that I could learn, and I don't know everything. And actually, that's okay. When I say it to you like that, it kind of feels as though you're this or you're that. Very black and white. It's not like that at all. It operates on a continuum. So I know for myself, I have a growth mindset when it comes to learning. I love it. I'm a nerd. I should get a t-shirt. I love learning. I'm a nerd. I just love it. But I have a very fixed mindset when it comes to running. I always say to my husband, I can't run. Now I can run, I just don't really enjoy it and I'm not very good at it. So think about the language that you use. What are the things that you say to yourself or to people around you? Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm not good at that. You will find very quickly the things that you have a fixed mindset on. We have a fixed and a growth mindset on people. We size people up very, very quickly. And based on interactions that we've had with people, one interaction, we will have a fixed impression as to who that person is. They may have been having a bad day, but for the rest of the time that we know them, they're the grumpy person. So when you're in a changing environment, it's really important to suspend judgment, to adopt the growth mindset so that you can take on board different opinions. Because our mindset drives our internal state, it drives our behaviour. So it ultimately drives what we do, which ultimately drives outcomes. And the challenge with all of this is our brain doesn't see everything. Our brain has blind spots, and yet we think we're seeing everything that we need to see. So who's had that experience where they've gone to the car sale yard on a Saturday and they go for a test drive and they drive a car, take the car back into the car sale yard? What's the next thing that happens? Next time you're on the road? Yep, you see that car everywhere. A car that you had never really noticed before, you see everywhere. That's a part of your brain which is called the reticular activation system, and it helps you focus on things. but it helps you focus to the exclusion of other things. So there was a great piece of research which was done in the States, and what these researchers did was they filmed two teams playing basketball, a team in white shirts and a team in black shirts, and the team is then throwing the basketball between each other. And the researchers film this, and then they play it to a group like this, and they say to the group, I want you to count the number of times the basketball is being thrown amongst the team in the white shirts. Just ignore the team in the black shirts. So they do this, it's played, the researchers then say how many times was the basketball thrown, everyone gets the answer right, they all get a little dopamine hit, they all feel very happy with themselves. And then the researcher says, who saw the person in the gorilla suit come on screen? More than 50% of the people in the room did not see someone in a gorilla suit come on screen for 7 seconds, beat its chest, and walk off screen. So you kind of sit here and go, how is that possible? And it's very possible. The brain was given explicit instructions. It was given a task. Your brain goes, haha, I love having a task to do. I'm going to focus on that task. I'm going to count. You also told me to exclude something, so I've excluded something. Think about it in your work environment, how easy it is for you to exclude things that you don't think you need because you think you have all the answers. This plays out all the time. And we also have it's kind of like a double whammy where we can have different parts of our brain activated. So I'm going to give you a little scenario and then I want you to think about what would most worry you. And you've got 5 choices. So it's a work scenario. Things are changing at work. Things are changing, and as a result of that change, your role is likely to be changing. What's going to most worry you? That your professionalism is being questioned in some way through this change? That you don't know what the impact is on you? That you're not involved? You can see that team members are going to be moving on as a result of the change? Or a poor performer, in your mind, is being rewarded? What would most annoy you or worry you? Who'd go for A, professionalism being questioned? Couple? Who'd go for B? Who'd go for C? Couple of C's. Who'd go for D? Very interesting. I did this with bankers last week and there were no Ds either. I had hoped in the not-for-profit someone would care about their team members leaving. And a poor performer being rewarded. A couple. This is actually what's called the SCARF model. It was created by an Australian neuroscientist who now lives in the States, Dr. David Rock. And his research, which builds off the research of others, has found that we have 5 domains of primary social experience. So it's how we see the world. And this gets activated in times of change and in times of stress. So effectively what we have is we have this constant tug of war. Your brain is constantly scanning the world and working out, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Is this something that I should go towards, or is this something that I should run away from? And so as your brain is doing this, different parts of your brain are being activated. So I'm going to give you a very non-scientific tour of the brain. So we've got an old part of the brain which sits back down here. This is our basal ganglia, it's the cerebellum, it's the part of the brain that is the brainstem that goes into the spinal cord. So it coordinates muscle movement. It's the part of the brain that keeps you alive. It breathes, it does digestion. You don't even realise it's there, but you'd notice it if you didn't have it. You've then got a middle part of the brain, which is the emotional centre. So if you've ever heard of terms like fight or flight, amygdala hijack, your limbic system, the hippocampus, all of that is centred in this emotional part of the brain. Now your hippocampus is interesting because your hippocampus is effectively where memory is created. So it's not where memory is stored. Memory is stored in all different parts of the brain. It's where memory is created, which is why when you think about your memory often, really strong ones, have a strong emotional attachment to them. You'll either be really happy, really sad, or really annoyed. The big part of the brain that separates us from all the other creatures on the planet is what's called our cortex. You know, we've got frontal lobes, parietal lobes, back lobes, left lobes, right lobes. Sadly, if you're ever told you're a left brain thinker or you're a right brain thinker, it's all bollocks. You're not. You actually use your whole brain. The part that's really interesting for us is the bit that runs across here. It's what's called our prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the brain that distinguishes us from other creatures because it's where we regulate our emotions. It's where we think. It's where we ration. It's where we reason. Now, some of you are probably sitting here going, oh, sure, this is very interesting, but why should I care? The reason you need to care, particularly in a work environment and in times of change. So your brain, as it's doing this very quick scan of the world, will detect what it sees as a stress trigger within a fifth of a second. I can't even say a fifth of a second, and we've had a fifth of a second. So within a fifth of a second, your brain has detected something that it sees as bad for it, or actually good for it as well, because it works both ways. Oh, I went too far. Speedy Gonzalez. What then happens is the hypothalamus, which is once again a part of the brain, sends triggers through your body. It sends messages to the adrenal glands to send adrenaline running through your body. Your blood rushes to your feet. The reason the blood rushes to your feet is in the olden days, that was your cue to run. So when we talk fight or flight was running. But you'll also notice it in terms of how your body is responding. So when you're detecting a stress trigger, and this happens so very, very quickly that you're not even aware that it's happening, your heart might start to beat a bit faster. Your hands might feel a bit clammy. Your mouth might start to go dry. When this is happening, your emotional part of the brain has overridden the thinking part of the brain. And what happens? You have reduced working memory. You have reduced ability to cognitively reason. In shorthand, you are far more likely to make crap decisions. You're much more likely to see something as a threat. So I could be having a very benign conversation with you, but I'm in threat state, and you're having this, what you think is a very innocent conversation. I'm thinking threat, 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 threat. I am no longer processing that information the same way as if I wasn't in a threat state. So I'm much more likely to overreact to it. I'm also going to have reduced field of view. By that I mean I'm less likely to look broadly, to take on board different pieces of information, which means it's harder for me to problem solve. And all of this happens very, very quickly. And in a work environment, I'm going to give you some examples, and then we're going to go to the worksheet because I want you guys to have a conversation about this. In a work environment, if we go back to the scarf model, it's not, someone's about, a saber-toothed tiger is going to kill me. In a status sense, it's, we've got a changing environment, my role's changing. I no longer feel as valued as I used to feel. When we use the word status, people always think hierarchy. It's not about hierarchy. It's not about I need to be more powerful than everybody else. It's about feeling valued. And when a person feels that they're not valued, when they experience a drop in status, they actually experience a drop in serotonin. And serotonin is what is used in antidepressants. And the same part of your brain is activated as if someone has physically hit you. Certainty. Our brain loves certainty. It only takes a little bit of uncertainty for our brain to go red alert. I don't know what to do. I'm now stressed. So when you're working with people in a changing environment, giving them certainty is really important. And I often say to people, when you're working on big change programs, often you don't know the answer right at the beginning. Tell people you don't know the answer. It's when you create a vacuum and you say nothing that they're going to assume the worst. Autonomy. We like autonomy. We like to feel as though we've got some control over what's going on around us. That autonomy, that control, helps us better manage what's going on. And once again, I often say to people, you may not be able to go, you've got control over the outcome. But often you can give people control over the process to get to the outcome. Giving and finding people a chance to be involved is really important. Relatedness. Our brain very quickly goes, friend, foe. Are you in my camp? Are you out of my camp? Are you part of my tribe? Are you in a different tribe entirely? And when I do that, when my brain has labelled, for example, you as, say, friend, and lovely Reg here, who I've never met before, sorry, I'm going to make you foe. As foe, what happens is I can be having a conversation. Both of you are saying identical things to me. But because I've got you in the friend camp and I've got you in the foe camp, different parts of the brain process the information. So I'm automatically going to trust Reg less. I'm automatically going to be less inclined to hear what he says, to give him the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if someone is a friend, you give them leeway, much more likely. And in a work context, We label people, we box people very, very quickly. And then fairness. We are hardwired for fairness. And it's interesting, there's new research which is just coming out of the States, which is showing that some of the best leaders, one of their key traits is fairness. Because if you are fair, you think about other people. You think about other people's needs rather than just think of your own. But when we think about this hardwiring of fairness, what it means is we would often rather get nothing than let someone else get more than their fair share. So what I want you guys to do, and we're going to do this at your tables. So in your worksheet, you'll see on the front page, I've just given you some examples. Oh, hang on. Oh, you didn't get a worksheet? Just behind you. And I'm going to show you some questions in a minute. But before that, I just want to play a quick clip. But this worksheet just gives you some of the away and towards. So when I was talking about the SCARF model, it works in the negative, but it works in the positive. So what you want to do is focus on how do you actually activate this so that people want to go towards it. Because you can get a status uplift. The more certain I am, the happier I'm going to be. The more status I have, the more serotonin I'm going to have running through my body. So we think about it in terms of the toward and the away state. But here's a lovely example of fairness in play. We need some volume.
That
Thanks.
are able to get out there and talk to the people on the ground and find out what they do.
That's not my video.
It's an important sector.
Hello. That sounded like something else. Are we right?
So the final experiment that I want to
Beautiful.
mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees. But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
You feel really sorry for the monkey. You just want to give him a grape. So what I want you to think about and have a conversation at your tables, and just pick one to work with. So don't pick all of them. When could you see this particular trigger? So when could you see status or certainty or autonomy being triggered? And what actions might you be able to take to mitigate that trigger being activated in the negative sense? So have a conversation. If you're on a small table and there's only two, you might want to join with others, find some friends. so that you can have a conversation. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to have a conversation, and then we'll come and do a share back as a group. If you've got any questions, stick your hand up and I'm happy to come to your table. So, did anyone here pick status? Was anyone working with status? Did anyone pick status? You guys did? What did you come up with in terms of where you could see it being triggered at work? Yep, overlooked for a task or a promotion. Yep. And what did you come up with in terms of ways that you could address that?
Regular open communication, formalised structures and documenting processes and things like that.
Yeah. And making people feel included. You know, status is one of those things where it can be as simple as, you know, everyone's in a meeting and you're the only person who hasn't been invited and you think you need to be there and your status will be hit. Were you guys working with status as well?
Yes, that would be me. One of the things as being a consultant, therefore you get in and you have a fairly intense relationship. There's an inevitable point where your clients have actually, there's an inevitable point where your clients have actually grown to the maturity you want or very close to it, and they don't need you holding their hand anymore. And there's always a moment where I'm fearful that I'm not being as beloved as I might have been a month or two ago. Yeah. But for me, it's now you work through that bias and you get on with it. Do you know what I mean? So it's actually appropriate, and over time, I've found that when I meet with them again, they're still very welcoming, but they just grew up, and which is exactly what my aim. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's your role.
Oh, well.
And who is working with certainty? Anyone? No one's certain. Ah, good. Excellent. Frank.
Certainty through change of where a composition of, say, members who've been on a board for a longer period of time and looking then through to regenerate with your members to adapt to changes, and obviously not wanting to have the organisation stagnate from visions of the past and not carry through some new visions moving forward.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so, yeah.
And what did you have as mitigants or ways you can overcome a lack of certainty? Did you get that far in the conversation?
No.
So good examples for certainty then are things like open communication, telling people where there are deadlines, and if a deadline shifts, you actually tell people that the deadline has shifted. As you know, I've worked in organisations where they'll go, oh yeah, we're going to announce everything on the 15th of March. 15th of March comes, 16th of March, 17th of March, and people are just sitting there going, well, they said they'd say something, and then the execs go, oh yeah, but we need more time. I said, well, then just tell people you need more time, rather than just leaving this vacuum of no knowledge. Because if there's no vacuum, someone else is going to fill it. And they'll fill it with information that you don't necessarily want it to be filled with. Autonomy. Who is working with autonomy? You guys were? What did you have, Jacinta?
We talked about putting decisions making in the hands of a few, and how that would trigger, and that could be triggered by asking the leadership to make all the decisions and not engaging everybody in it.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah, and then the way we talked about how we could mitigate that was keeping communications open and sharing information and engaging people with what was going on.
Yeah, beautiful. Giving people a choice as well. A choice as to how they want to get involved or not want to get involved. A choice as to what part of the process do you want to get involved with? A choice, because sometimes it doesn't have to be A, it could be A or B, but as the leader you'd prefer A, but actually you're not going to die in a ditch if they did B. So actually give them a choice, whether it's A or B. Relatedness, was anyone working with relatedness? No? So with relatedness, this is very much how's the team working, or how individuals are connecting with each other. And so relatedness will get activated if a person feels as though other people in the team are being left out, or they're being excluded, or if they think that people in the team aren't being fairly treated. If a person, this is a big, strong trigger for them, this can be activated for them. So with relatedness, it's team sessions, it's treating everybody equitably, it's being open and transparent. So often you'll find the mitigants to kind of dampen down these triggers in the negative sense are actually the same. Which means we must have a couple of tables then who worked with fairness. Anyone work with fairness? What did you guys at the back have?
We looked whether it's real or perceived. If you're working in an organisation with different service units or teams, one team being perceived as getting greater benefits than another.
Yep.
But we didn't get to mitigation.
Okay. And look, I mean, that's a great thing about fairness. Fairness is a perception. And so much of fairness is about transparency. Transparency of outcome, transparency of process, so that people feel as though it's been fairly treated, fairly managed. So with a tool like this, I often get clients to use it to help drive conversations, because it gives a language that you can use with people in your organisation about what they're going through. And it actually normalises it's okay that when you're going through change to have a reaction. Whereas often what happens is when people are going through change, there's this whole sense of, oh, don't react, don't tell them that you're scared, don't tell them that you've got any emotion. You know, my God, don't show emotions. Whereas actually it's natural to feel something when you're going through a change, to feel a loss sometimes. You know, if I go back through my days in corporate and I got to very senior levels, and I remember one time I'd been in this amazing team and then the team was coming to an end, I felt a sense of loss because I had created this team from scratch. And we had such a good sense of cohesion. But rather than be sad about it, we celebrated the end of the team. And what did that then mean for all of us in terms of where we are now going? So it's a great tool to be able to use with your team. If you think about the conversation we've had about your brain and how your brain works, if you don't recognise the fact that your brain has all of these things going on very, very quickly, it's very easy to make unwise decisions because you're using the past to interpret the future. You're using the past to actually interpret what you need to do. So it creates this sense of faulty thinking, which can create a faulty choice, which ultimately leads to faulty outcomes. We as humans have this lovely bias where we are overconfident. We're overconfident about a level of ability, and we're also overconfident about what we can get done in any one period of time. The lovely thing is all the research shows that overconfidence, there is a correlation between overconfidence and seniority. The more senior you are in the organisation, the more overconfident you are. And the reason for that, you know, when you get to senior levels, you are typically surrounded by sycophants who just tell you what you want to hear. And so being explicit and saying to people, I need you to challenge me. I'm going to make better decisions and have better outcomes when you challenge me. And I'm going to be willing to learn from my mistakes. And here's an example of when someone didn't learn from their mistakes.
Now, Field Marshal Haig has formulated a brilliant new tactical plan to ensure final victory in the field.
Will this brilliant plan involve us climbing out of our trenches and walking very slowly towards the enemy, sir?
How could you possibly know that, Blackadder? It's classified information.
It's the same plan that we used last time, and the 17 times before that.
Exactly. And that is what is so brilliant about it. It will catch the watchful Hun totally off guard. Doing precisely what we've done 18 times before is exactly the last thing they'll expect us to do this time. There is, however, one small problem.
That everyone always gets slaughtered in the first 10 seconds.
That's right. And Field Marshal Haig is worried that this may be depressing the men attacked. He's looking to find a way to cheer them up.
Well, his resignation and suicide would seem the obvious.
Gotta love Blackadder. It's funny because we can all sit here and laugh, and I reckon we can probably all count on a couple of hands times at work when we've seen things like that happen. This failure to learn from the past, the failure to take a risk and do something differently. So I often say to people, bias, it's actually natural. We often look at bias as a pejorative term, you know, that person's biased, and I go, yeah, so are you actually. We all have bias because of the way our brain is constructed. And so one of the key things is to then think about how do you actually consciously cultivate better decisions? And there's a number of elements to it. The first piece is really to understand your mindset. Is it fixed or is it growth? How is it setting you up for how you make decisions? What's the process that you're using to make those decisions in an environment that's changing? Is it a linear process? Do you recognise that you may not actually have all the answers? Sometimes you have to make decisions with imperfect data. Or you might be able to go, I'm making a decision that might be okay for now, but it might not be okay for later because the world is changing so much. And what's the culture that you're creating in your environment, in your organisation to make decisions? Lack of sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you make bad decisions. If you have a lot of time pressure, you are far more likely to make bad decisions. They did this lovely study in the US where they told people that they had to move from building A to building B. They didn't tell these people that they were part of an experiment. But what they would do is, as they're moving from building A to building B, everybody had to step over a person who was writhing on the floor in pain. They would increase the urgency that the person had to get from building A to building B. And they found that as they increased the urgency of the task to get from building A to building B, people were more likely than not to step over the person lying on the floor writhing in pain. But what would happen when that person got to building B was they were highly agitated. Highly agitated because they knew they had made a decision that was not aligned with their values. So we often put undue pressure on people to make decisions in a way that's not actually good for them. And if we go back to the prefrontal cortex, which I was talking about before, your prefrontal cortex is like a battery. It depletes through the day. And yet I work with executive teams who want to do these 2-day events, and then on the second day, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to make all the decisions. And I'm like, you are so much better off coming back in for day 3 and spending an hour on day 3 making the decisions. When you are tired and stressed, you make different decisions. And there was research that was done once again in the US where they looked at parole board judges. And were you more or less likely to get paroled if you went before a parole board judge in the morning or in the afternoon? You're far less likely to get paroled in the afternoon. The default thinking, the natural way of thinking for a judge, let a criminal on the streets? No. So it's easier to say no when you're tired because that's what your default thinking pattern is. But we also have heaps and heaps of bias. And so with bias, it's about awareness. So what I want you to do is go to your next worksheet, and we've got a game. In this worksheet, I've given you some examples of different types of bias, and you need to match the bias type to the definition. And I'm going to give you a hint because I'm nice, and there's a prize. Actually, there's 2 prizes. 1 prize, 2 people, if that makes sense. I have a book, and I'm giving away some copies of my book. So, because I'm nice, I'm giving you one of the answers. Filtering, which is E, is number 4. If you think you have the answer, you need to come to me. It's too hard for me to run around to everybody. Come to me, and I will show and check and tell you if you're right. Oh, yay, well done. Woohoo. We have 1 winner. We've got 1 more to go. Don't show your neighbours. Well done. Thank you. And someone at the back? No, but very close. Okay, I'll give you the answers. So, the first one, anchoring. It's number 2. What anchoring is we often anchor ourselves with the first piece of data or the first piece of information we're given. This plays out all the time in negotiations. So be careful of your starting point because that's often where you will finish. Bandwagon, which is number 6. We are tribal creatures. We like to go with the crowd. We like to flow with the flock. Don't like to sometimes stand out. Discounting is number 1. We will discount what's in the future to take what we can get now. So if I said to you, I'm going to give you $20 now, or you can have $200 in 2 years' time, most people will take the $20 now. We live for the now. We don't live for the future. Plays out all the time. Confirmation bias, number 3. We seek information to confirm what we already know. We like to be right, rather than seek information to disprove something. So when you're building new ideas in organisations, when you're coming up with stuff, often we don't test to fail. We test to get it right. Where sometimes you actually need to test to fail, particularly when environments are changing and you don't have all the information. Failing is actually a good thing for you. Filtering, which was 4. We filter out information that doesn't fit with our view of the world. Mere exposure, number 7. The more exposed, the more familiar, the more we see something, the more we like it. And lastly, overconfidence, which I spoke a little about before, which is number 5. We can be overconfident about our own opinions, but we also get overconfident about experts. We rely often too much on experts because someone is seen as an expert. We can take their opinion at face value. take their advice rather than be curious and skeptical. And I often say to people, skepticism is so important, particularly in this kind of era of fake news where we filter the information that we read. We need to be skeptical of what we hear and read. So if we go back to those 3 A's, awareness, acceptance and action. So we've spoken about the awareness of the brain, how our brain works, the fact that we all have bias. The acceptance piece is just understanding. Being really conscious in my work environment, if something's changing, what can I change? What can't I change? What can I potentially influence? And I do this activity with teams, particularly when teams feel as though, often support functions, they're like, I don't have any influence. These people in the organisation, they make all the decisions. It's all just dumped on us and then we have to deal with it. And often when you work through with them what they can change and what they can influence, it's far greater than what they really think they've got the ability to be able to have some sense of control over. So talking about this, recognising what you can influence, and then thinking about the actions that you take to support that new awareness and to support the acceptance that you've got. And a lot of this is actually about creating new habits. And so if we think about change in an organisational sense, and when it comes down to you as an individual and how you cope with change in your organisation, often you need to create new habits. Now, the lovely thing about a habit is it saves you energy. So when I was talking before about the prefrontal cortex and it's the battery, a habit operates in a different part of the brain. So when something becomes a habit, you no longer actually have to use the thinking part of your brain. It just happens. So who here has tried to change a habit? Did it work? Not really? Eventually. Okay. Well, the conventional wisdom is it takes anywhere from 21 days to 8 months to change a habit, depending on how big the habit is and how complex it is. But you need to slice it down. You're much better off at building a new habit when it's small, because we don't change a habit, we replace habits. And when you replace a habit, the payoff for the new habit that you're doing needs to be equal than or greater than the habit that you're trying to get rid of. So habits take time. You set up a cue that reminds you that you want to do something. There needs to be a trigger, which is your cue. There needs to be a process or a routine that you follow, and then there's your payoff. So all of this in an organisational sense is then also thinking about and reminding yourself, we as individuals are actually much more motivated by the internal intrinsic motivational levers of feeling that we have a sense of purpose, feeling that we have the skill to be able to do the job, feeling as though we have some say, than money. All the research shows money's important. Money's like an equaliser. We don't like getting paid less than what we should get paid, but it's really not what motivates people. People are genuinely motivated because they want to come and do a good job and they want to make a sense of progress in the organisation that they're in. So I want to share with you some things that you can think about, and this is our last worksheet. So I'm going to talk this through, and as I talk this through, have a think about what you might want to do. In an organisation, you have a choice as to the role that you want to play and what you're going to do to set yourself up for success every single day in an environment that's changing. And these are some ideas. And the reason I want you to do it from a stop, start, continue is, if you think about it as a habit, what's one thing you might want to change? And it needs to matter to you. Because if you want to change, it's got to be something that you care about. We never want to change if someone tells us we have to do something, because our brain kind of harks up. So what's going to matter to you? Is it that you need to get more exercise or sleep? All of those environmental factors that will actually help you, those self-care practices. That practice, the whole concept of 10,000 hours of learning. What's the deliberate practice that you need to put in place? The more you practice something, the better you will become at it. And eventually it does become habit, because it's the way your brain works. Your brain has neural pathways, and the more you do something, the deeper that pathway becomes. And so it becomes easier for you to do. Where's your learning edge? Where's that point of discomfort? If you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. And as soon as you stop learning, eventually you become obsolete in your career. So what's the new learning that you're going to do? What's to the left or the right of your current career? Because we know we're going to have long careers. We need to in terms of continuing to work. So what's going to continue from your learning pathway? Meditation, mindfulness, both sides of the same coin, but they are different. The research now shows You actually don't even need to be a long-term meditator, but long-term meditators have a part of the brain called the insula, which is enlarged, which helps them make better decisions. Even just short-term meditation practices, because it helps to slow you down, it helps you when you're in those periods of feeling like you've got a stress trigger to be able to cope better. Because the activation of your amygdala and then the reactivation of the prefrontal cortex, what stops the amygdala? Breathing. It gives your brain time for the prefrontal cortex to be activated. Mindfulness is the presence, being present in the moment, reflecting on what's going on so that you're not just reacting to what's in front of you. Visualization, we have this thing in our brain called mirror neurons. And what that means is if we visualize ourselves doing something, it's the same as actually doing it. Now, someone once said to me, does that mean I don't need to exercise? I can just sit on a couch and visualize myself exercising? Yeah, sorry. Doesn't quite work like that. But athletes use visualization techniques all the time as part of their preparation for races. And so I often say to people, if you're going into a big meeting and it's something that might make you nervous, visualize how the meeting is going to go. Visualize how the conversation is going to go to help set you up. Reflection. Reflection's a really important part. What am I doing? How's my brain reacting? How am I reacting to what's going on around me? And lastly, that whole piece is suspending judgment so that you're aware of, hey, I do have bias against situations, against people. What's that meaning for how I'm coping in my environment when it's changing? So I'm just going to give you a minute just to reflect on that, write some notes down on your worksheet, and then we're going to come back and have another conversation. Okay, so we'll come back as a group, and this might be something that you reflect on as you go through the day. And as I started this session with these decision points, what's sticking in your mind in terms of what you want to take away and what you want to do? Now, I always like to leave gifts, so I do come bearing some gifts. Now, the easiest way to do this, you can give me your card and I will send them to you, or you can just SMS this number. So this is the way it works. I do a lot of work around change, helping organisations, cope with change, helping individuals cope with change, and particularly work with leaders so that they understand what they need to do to influence in environments and also build the networks that they need, but also support their team through change. So there's a couple of guides that I've got, which if you're interested, send me your details and I'll get them sent to you early next week. So there's a guide around 8 things influential people do differently. Change is all about influence. It's all about understanding the environment in which you work and then being able to position yourself so that you can influence in that environment. A couple of people have a copy of the book. So I wrote a book earlier this year. If you would like a copy, you can come and buy a copy later, which is once again focused on complex changing environments and what you need to do. If you SMS that number, I will send you an extract, which is the first couple of chapters of the book. I've got a guide included in there in terms of how to build networks. How do you think about what sort of network you need, not just for the changing environment you're in, but also in terms of how do you position yourself for your career. A mindfulness practice. I am really big. Meditation and mindfulness, they're so important. My husband often used to call me Snappy Tom, and then I started meditating and I'm not Snappy Tom anymore. So it really does help. Although recently he said to me, you're getting snappy again. Are you doing your meditation practice? So it does help. And lastly, a white paper in relation to decision making, because so much of what you do every day when you're dealing with change is making decisions. So feel free to come and give me your contact details or SMS the number. SMSing is obviously the easiest way for me because it's all then a lovely little process. But just to give you also another thing to kind of think about and take away is I do a lot of work in this space. And so I always say to people that I work with in this kind of context, if you're interested in masterclasses, I'm offering a discount. I'm happy to come in and have a conversation with you around what that could look like. Everything I do gets tailored to your organisation. I also run change leadership mentoring programs, which run over a 6-month period, where I work with people who are going through a change, particularly if they haven't done it before and they're dealing with something that is new, and guide them through the process that they need to follow. And then I can also talk to you about what you need to do to build your team's capability around change. So look, I'm happy to stick around if you've got any questions. I am conscious that I think there's lunch probably down the hall somewhere and people are really probably hungry. But just the thing that I always say to people, everyone's experience is unique, and this is about making it work for you, because you can make change work for you depending on what you're prepared to do about it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thanks. Thanks, Michelle. That was extremely illuminating. And as Michelle said, there's the contact details. I think there's some cards here. Certainly do that.